Well, a very warm welcome to Kathy Veel. Now, Kathy, we'll start at the end rather than the beginning with your story. But the women crew, two-handed to Hobart, the first women to compete and finish the two-handed division in the Rolex Sydney Hobart race. But I want to take you to 18 minutes to midnight, 2022, New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
Your little boat, Currawong, 99 boats had finished, and along comes Currawong to an absolute hero's reception to coincide with New Year's Eve, but a lot of it was for you. What were your feelings then?
It was amazing. First of all, on the boat, the wind was just fading to nothing, and we were really struggling to get across the line. You couldn't even see the finish line because of all the flashing lights around, and we only knew we'd actually finished when we heard people cheering. But I was just really trying to keep the boat off the rocks and moving forward. And we had been told there were one or two people there for us, but we crossed the line, and then straight away someone said, "There's a fireworks barge in front of you, don't hit it." And all of a sudden it was just like walking in or sailing or drifting into a movie set. It was just such a contrast from the 5 days with just two of us on the sea, and all of a sudden it was just, where am I? And then I could hear people chanting, Currawong, and I was in tears. It was just
I bet, but
huge.
That reception is normally reserved for the line honours winner, and it was one of the biggest receptions ever. And I mean, you were there; it was all about you, really, and it just happened to be New Year's Eve.
Yeah,
5 minutes to midnight, basically.
Yeah.
What a wonderful finish it must have been, and thrill for you.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll come to that race a bit later, the whole race, and get the story. So where does the Kathy Veel story begin? When did you get involved with sailing, and where did you grow up?
Yeah, well, I was born in Melbourne, and the family moved to Sydney, but a long way from the ocean or anything. And I got into sailing when my boyfriend's father had commissioned an S&S 34 to be built, and this was in 1970. So they were the hot boat there after Morning Cloud winning the Hobart. And we used to go down and watch the build of the boat, and eventually it got launched. And then it was really just family cruising on Pittwater on this beautiful boat. And that was where I really learned that I loved sailing, and that was when I started to get some skills.
And did you do any racing at that early stage?
Not really, except for one, which still sits in my memory, and that was there was a squadron cruise up to Lake Macquarie and a race around the lake, and I got to race on Caprice of Huon with Gordon Ingate.
Wow.
So that was probably my first yacht race.
Well, not a bad boat and a skipper to start with, that's for sure. For sure. Well, that must have been a thrill for you at that time.
Yeah, it sure was.
Yes. So then, how was your journey after that?
Well, after that, that relationship ended. Let's say I made a lot of mistakes with the relationships and I sort of then thought, well, what's something that I really love doing? I'll put that front and centre and let the rest of my life unfold around that. So I bought a little 24-foot timber yacht, and I'd been reading everything, particularly about single-handed sailors, people like Robin Lee Johnson and Naomi James, and basically I felt that I wanted to sail a little boat a long way was what I had in mind.
Why?
I don't know. I still don't quite know why, but I need to. But no, really, with a boat, I think it's the independence and the freedom that come with that. It's a small enough space and object that you sort of feel like you can get your head around it, because I understand that you need to know all the systems and all about the boat, and starting off with a small boat that I could manage was a good way to go. And so I've always sailed my own boats since I started. That was back in the very late 70s that I started doing that.
Where did you go on the little 24-footer? Did you go far and wide? Or?
Broughton Island was as far as I sailed it, and given that it was pretty much an open boat and had a tiny little petrol engine, And I look back now and think, how did I get away with that? But she was a very sea-kindly boat.
And that's from Sydney to Broughton Island?
Yeah, yeah, it was, yeah.
And then after that?
After that, I got a bit fed up with spending weekends on the boat and then being at home and going to work, and I thought I want a boat I can live on. And a couple sailed this beautiful little Harrison Butler double-ender into Castle Craig Boat Shed, which is where I was based. And I just said to them, have you brought that here to sell it? And they said, oh, well, not quite yet. But a year later, I bought that boat. So I moved from a 24-footer to a 25-footer.
Right. Little steps.
And I did live on her, but she was a really tough boat. She'd sailed across the Tasman and up to Fiji, and I thought she was the boat I was going to sail a really long way on. And then I met my husband. So there's a slight deflection there, and we did a lot of cruising on that boat.
So was he a sailor?
He'd grown up sailing on really home-built dinghies and boats on Pittwater, and he'd sailed on square riggers, and his real passion is tall ships.
Right.
And he's an artist. You know, he's very much land-based. He's a landscape painter, so extended periods of time on a boat isn't what he wants to do, and he'd never want to go and adopt the cruising life. But he sails, and we had some really good times just up and down the New South Wales coast in that boat.
On that little 25-footer?
Yeah, yeah. And we hadn't known each other long when we went on a cruise up to Queensland, and we always reckon that the sort of 3 months of that was about equal to 10 years of marriage.
And were you working at this stage, or did you...
Oh, yeah.
In what profession?
I was an art teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, for 40 years.
Right.
Yeah.
At high schools? Or
yes, at high schools. First of all in Sydney, and then around 1991, we had a young son by then, and we needed to move to a bigger house. So we ended up moving up to the Blue Mountains and had to sell Quest, the boat. And so sailing was put on hold for some time, and I got very much involved in being a mother and a teacher and managing what we had up there.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did you get back into it?
Well, I always knew there was unfinished sailing business, and so Jeff, my husband, and I went down to the Wooden Boat Festival in Tasmania, and sitting right there was a boat that I had admired a lot when I was living on board Quest, and it had been built by a friend of mine, another New Zealand boat, and I came away at the end of the weekend owning a boat in Tasmania.
Expensive trip.
It was, yeah.
And what was that boat?
She was called Quintet. She was a Bill Mitchinson was a New Zealand designer. He's hardly ever known, but it was launched in '69. It was double diagonal cowrie with a flat bottom, and a lot like the Lotus type designs. They're sort of very much in the same tradition. But she was a real trailblazer. And
how long was she?
30 feet. And she'd done the, is it Whangarei to Noumea race?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And in that race, she did 211 miles in a 24-hour period. So, which I'm glad I wasn't on board.
Yeah, quick downwind.
Yeah, she was. Yeah. And so she was a great little boat. And I kept her in Tasmania for 10 years. Oh, right. And
so how did you manage that if you're living in Blue Mountains and then
school holidays and weekends often, and what I found was that the costs of keeping the boat in Tasmania will offset the airfares of getting there, and it was actually a really good thing to do. I had a network of friends down there as well, and the boat facilities are fantastic down there.
And you did a lot of cruising?
Yeah, in the Channel and around Bruny Island. And
beautiful place to cruise, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we keep going. We've got a 30-footer. In Tasmania. Yep. Where do we go from there?
Okay, I guess the next thing is when I retired from teaching, which was the end of 2013, and which is earlier than I should have retired if I'd been financially very sensible, but I didn't want to just get too old to do other stuff. So I made a condition for myself, which was if you retire early, just say yes to whatever opportunities open up and see where it takes you. And what that turned out to be was sailors with disabilities. I'd been aware of them since really they started. And there was a little ad in a float magazine for an orientation day. So I I went down and told them about myself, saw what they were doing, and was asked then if I would run one of their programs in Tasmania.
And was that here at the CYC or in Tasmania?
Well, that was here at the CYC,
yes.
But the first program that I got involved with was in Tasmania, and I found myself in charge of 54-footer and crew and all our clients. So I was on a really steep learning curve, but it worked. I was up to it, it turned out.
Well, that must have been a tough thing to do. Tough in the nicest way, with sailors with disability. I mean, how did you manage through all that? That was a big exercise, I'm sure.
It was. There's actually a whole background to that too, which we hadn't covered, of when I got involved in racing on bigger boats and, the whole women on water thing, and as a co-skipper and a navigator on that. So I'd had some experience, and I'd had a Yachtmaster offshore certificate, but it had been quite a long time since I'd used those skills. But I think it's just, how did I manage it, you asked? I think it was just a matter of sort of trusting yourself that you can do it. I sort of think I've always been the sort of person that'll jump into the deep water and then figure out how to swim. No, so far I haven't drowned, but just that, and every experience just gives you the more skills and more confidence to carry on.
And I guess there's great satisfaction in doing something like that.
Oh, and unbelievable benefits, certainly, and the people that you meet for a start. Working with people with disabilities makes you really reassess your own life and your attitude to it and what you prioritise, and then the volunteers. So that one of the things that I sort of knew might happen was that I didn't want to just join a yacht club, but I wanted something where there was, I don't know, a little bit more of a real humanity or something about it. Yeah.
And you then did a Hobart race with the all-girl. Did you do an all-girl?
I did.
Crew?
Yeah, that was actually quite a way before that. That was in 1989. Yeah.
And what boat was that on?
It was one of the old ragamuffins, which had done the Admiral's Cup. It was then called Otago, and we chartered it, and through our sponsorship, the Bell Helicopter Company, it raced as Bell's Long Ranger.
That's right. So that was all girl?
That was all girls. That we were actually the second ever all-women crew to ever do the race.
And where do those crew members come from? Where did you get all those girls?
Yeah, well, that was interesting. There were 4 of us who got together in a meeting, and I knew one of them, she knew another, and who knew another. But we'd all done different aspects of sailing, and thought, well, let's have a go at doing an all-women crew in the Sydney Hobart. And at that stage we had no boat, no crew, no money, but we just, I don't know, we managed to pull it off through fundraising. We attracted quite a lot of potential crew, and had to select from who we had, and got enough money through our fundraising. We got a little bit of sponsorship, and finally 6 weeks before the race we had a yacht to sail. So
and you finished the
very
race?
Intense. We did, yeah. We got there, and we were pretty proud of ourselves.
And what was your role on the boat?
My role, I was 2IC on the boat, yeah.
Right. And then was there another Hobart race shortly after that?
Yeah, there was, yeah. So Women on Water went on and did they did a number of Hobarts and organised other regattas. But in 1992, then we had sponsorship from Telecom, and we sailed as Telecom Mobile Net And the yacht we had was Nadia 4, which is beautiful, far 40. And Techie Dalton, who owned her, was a great supporter. And Kerry Gouge was the skipper.
And that was all girl again?
That was all girl. And I was the navigator on that trip. And there were 2 all-women crews in the race that year. The other one was Ella Bachet.
That's right.
Yeah, with Adrienne Carlin and Vanessa and all the rock stars. But we got there first.
So the all-girl theme was coming through then. I mean,
yeah, it was. Yeah. For me, part of that, I'd been the navigator on a crew full of blokes, and I was teaching at an all-boys high school, and then spending weekends racing with all these guys on this boat, and that was all right. But you really did have to, put up with a lot of the language and the sledging and everything, which I felt uncomfortable about. I was navigator on Doctor Who, and I really had to prove my ability, and have the skipper actually trust what I was doing. That took a while, but in the end that was good. And he actually then put me in charge of the boat for delivery back from Southport, and so that was really my first go running a big boat like that.
And are you still involved with Sailors with Disability?
I am, which is now called the Making Waves Foundation.
That's right.
And I'm a volunteer skipper with them.
And what's involvement there for you?
Sails out of Sydney, day sailing for our clients, and then we take the boat up the coast in winter. So there are passages there, offshore passages from between Sydney and Mackay, and delivery trips between Hobart and Sydney again. So lots of opportunities to work and mentor new crew members, and keep providing a wonderful experience for people and adults.
And a difficult question, I guess, how severe are the disabilities of the people that you take out there?
Look, they range from sort of being somewhere on the maybe autism spectrum for some students, which means that their communications are really, really limited, and their ability to respond to people is limited. But even for them, if they can just spend a day feeling like they're part of a team, that's what we aim for, and you really do see a change in that. And then at the more extreme end, I guess, of physical disabilities, we have paraplegics who sail with us and have done offshore passages, blind crew members, and amputees, and
it's a huge responsibility for you
it is,
guys.
I know.
And how many on the boat, able-bodied people, would be on the boat when you sail a 50-footer, for example?
Well, our crew number normally is 6, but within that 6, some of them may have disabilities too. So provided they can perform their role as a crew member, the disability is not necessarily factored in as something that needs to be compensated for, let's say.
And have you ever run into really severe conditions when things didn't turn out too well?
What, on any boat?
Well, no, on disability boats more.
Not really. We keep a fairly safe arena on the
Pretty
boat,
well managed,
and I've not had any nasties in that regard.
Right.
We had some heavy weather coming back from Hobart a couple of years ago, but that was fine. Everybody coped on that.
So, and what other before last year's Hobart race? What other Hobarts have you done?
Just those 2 with Women on Water. So last year was my 3rd.
Right. Yeah. And have you done any cruising? Have you done much?
I have
cruising?
actually. Yeah. I've done in my own boat some cruising, and then with friends I've sailed from Sydney to Vanuatu and Thursday Island to Darwin. So sort of 1,500-mile passages, and I love it. I just love being at sea. So, yeah.
Well, Kathy, with all these adventures you've had, bad weather, have you really struck some bad weather experiences that you can now look back on and say, well, probably it wasn't as bad as I thought?
Yeah, the worst weather that I ever had was off the east coast of Tasmania, and that was on a trip I was doing as a skipper instructor on an S&S 34. And we'd set out. I could see these low pressure systems. This is, by the way, back in before there was weather information. What you did back then was you'd buy the Herald for a week, line up all the weather maps, and then try and work out your own predictions as to where it was going to go. And I did call the Bureau of Meteorology there and said, look, there are these low pressure systems. What's the chance that they'll converge on the east coast? And he said, no, they won't. This one's going there and that one's going south. And they did all converge. So we had around, I don't know, for most of the night we had above 40 knots, and a very big sea had built up. Then this was, I don't know, somewhere off Flinders Island, north of there. And so we had just a storm trysail up at that stage. We had one person on watch in the cockpit at a time, but every time you open the hatch to change people, just water just came in. And but it was just like a party down below. Everyone on board loved it. That was what they'd come to experience. The boat was really sound and terrific. And the next day when the wind died down, there was this massive swell. But I look back at that and I don't think, oh, it wasn't that bad. You know, I think, yeah, that was pretty bad, because it's still worse than anything I've seen since.
And who owned that boat?
That was owned by Ros and Barry Lewis, who ran a sailing school, and they weren't able to do the return trip because Barry was in Antarctica. Ros had skippered the race but left her 5-month-old daughter while she did it. And yeah, so they asked me if I would be a skipper and instructor for that return trip.
And Barry was the son of David Lewis.
That's right, yeah.
He had a few adventures in his lifetime, David Lewis, didn't he? Around Antarctica and around the world.
Yeah, that's another level of madness. But Barry was, you know, with David in the early days and all his Pacific navigation research. And Barry's a wonderful seaman. Yeah.
And are you, with our very friendly club over the way, the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, you're involved there with Ladies of the Sea program? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think, you know, like the CYC is great, but the squadron's done a real lot for promoting women's sailing, mostly thanks to Karen Goynich, I think, there and her efforts. And so the people that I knew there, I know through Making Waves Foundation. They've come here and volunteered. So I started sailing on their Tuesday night ladies' twilights. And they have a regatta every October for which the format is on-water training and coaching, and then a race in the afternoon and workshops and celebrations in the evening. So they asked Bridget and myself if we would coach this year, and that was on the back of our Hobart experience. And it was a terrific weekend, and you know, we all learned so much, myself included, because you're sailing on different boats with different people, and you're learning from other coaches. You know, people like Lisa Blair, you're going to learn stuff. Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to take you to Currawong.
Yeah.
The little Peter Joubert design, 30-footer. How did that come about, that whole program for you?
Yeah, well...
And your crew, Bridget Cannon, she has been a long-time friend and crew member for you?
Oh, yeah, okay. I'll start with Currawong first. Yeah. And this goes back to during COVID. And my husband actually said to me, I think you need another boat. Oh, yeah, because I'd sold Quintet, my Tassie boat, right at the start of Currawong. This couple came along and wanted to buy her, and I had been thinking of selling her. So that happened extremely easily, and I was very, very happy with that. especially when lockdowns happened. But then my husband said, I think you need another boat. And so at that stage I was looking for a boat that I could feel confident sailing across Bass Strait in, because I wanted to go back and see friends in Tassie. So I started looking at a few Currawongs, knowing the history of Zeus 2, knowing about the builder, Jeff Baker, of all the Joubert boats. I knew it would be, a boat that was up to the job if I could find one. There were a few on the market, and the one I eventually found was down in Melbourne. And she'd been based in Melbourne for many years, had no racing history to speak of apart from when she was originally built. And it turns out she is the very first of the Currawongs out of the mould. So that's why she's got the name. And so I think she's a pretty special sort of a boat. And I sailed her up to Sydney double-handed just after the lockdowns were finishing. And I was really happy with the boat and the way it handled.
And who sailed with you?
Bit of a friend of a friend of a friend. Because when I was waiting for... I had 2 crew organised who were terrific sailors, but then COVID erupted again, and both of them have either got a disability or a partner with a disability. And so I didn't want to put them in risk of travelling, and they didn't want to either. So we just delayed the whole thing. But then they weren't available. So I ended up sailing the first leg from Melbourne to Eden, which I'd never gone through the RIP in Melbourne. So it was a new trip for me with a guy I'd never met. And he flew to Melbourne to get on a boat he'd never seen with a woman he'd never met, who'd never sailed that boat before. So many, many acts of faith.
Brave fellow.
Oh, I know. But, it all worked. So, and another good friend out of that. So, got Currawong back up here and sorted out where I was going to keep her and all of that. And then Bridget. So one of the things that we do with Making Waves is do twilight races, which is a nice lead-in and opening for people to get involved with sailing. And Bridget has been a volunteer with, mostly on the racing side, with Making Waves for many years. And she and I had met in 1989 with the Women on Water campaign. So she wasn't in the actual crew that year, but she did more of the Women on Water Hobarts that I didn't do. So we knew about each other, but we didn't know each other at all well. And we did find ourselves racing on the Making Waves TP for a while, and then on Twilights. And so I knew Bridget's a really good sailor, and tough as. And I don't know, I think somewhere we were sitting up on the rail in the Twilight race.
Yes.
Just talking about it, and two-handers was a new thing in the Hobart too. And for me, it wasn't such a leap between two-handed cruising, which you do all the time, and then two-handed racing. So I thought it'd be like, two-handed, but with someone else on the boat that also wants to make the boat go as fast as possible all the time. And I think we were talking about it on the rail, and somehow the idea developed, and a few people overheard the conversation. And all of a sudden it was happening.
Became reality.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And did you do a GoFundMe program with that boat?
Yeah, so what happened was that we sort of, it's an expensive exercise getting a boat ready for Hobart, and I'm an aged pensioner, and Bridget at that stage was still working, but she's a nurse, so neither of us have got access to massive pools of money. And so we set up a Facebook page and started posting our preparation and what we were doing. And then people started saying, look, we'd like to help. You need to set up a GoFundMe page. So that's what we did. And so we got some wonderful support just from friends, and then the networking just kept on extending. And
so that was a lead up to last year's, the 2022 Rolex Hobart race.
That's right. Yeah.
So the boat, you got the boat ready to go, and you did the
We did
the Cabbage Tree Island race as a lead up race.
Yeah.
and then off we go on Boxing Day.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Talk us through that. How did that all go? I mean, it ended very well in spectacular circumstances, but there was a lot to go on before that. You got to Hobart, that's for sure.
Yeah, so in the race itself. So, yeah, well, I mean, in an ideal world, you'd approach the race day being well rested and well prepared and settled, but it just was not like that at all because we were working on the preparations.
And you're living at the Blue Mountains?
And I live in the Blue Mountains, yeah. So that was very intense. So I was pretty already, it was just a mixture of tiredness, but also a lot of adrenaline going on as well. And the start wasn't bothering me too much because with the 4 start lines and all the other double-handers were going to be on our line, and we know each other, no one's going to kill each other in that. But, you know, you just don't know what you're going to be dealing with in the race, and if you're not a bit apprehensive, I think you'd be stupid. And there was some strong downwind weather, and that was the weather I was most wary of actually in that race. So I just kept trying to think, okay, we're just going out for a sail down the coast and we'll see how far we go, and trying to keep away from the idea of the event that it actually was. But
right.
Yeah.
So you got down the New South Wales coast?
Yeah, we did. And we actually flew down there. We had the spinnaker up for 21 hours non-stop, double-handed, which is in fact alternating single-handing when you're sailing the boat and running watches. And we had fantastic boat speeds and with the current, and we ended up getting down to Bateman's Bay, I think, in about 24 hours. And then it was starting to be apparent to me that we were going to be down entering Bass Strait at night with this 45 to 50 knot wind forecast. And I, at that stage, hadn't had any sleep at all in the race. I just felt, I don't know if I'm up to this with just 2 of us, because Bridget did most of the foredeck work. Mm-hmm. I would be steering the boat, and I was just worried about steering that boat. You know, old half-tonner style of boats are notoriously difficult to steer downwind. And I wasn't sure that I could keep Bridget safe. That was one of it. And I'd always thought that personal injury was by far the highest risk that we were facing in starting the race. I wasn't worried about the boat, but just for one thing to go wrong when there's just 2 of you on board puts the other one in a difficult position. So I was, and just also, you know, you're going at night into rubbish weather and there's a safe port right there. And all my kind of seamanship instincts were going, this is stupid. And it was actually me that made the call to go into Bass Strait. Bridget would have very much preferred to have carried on. And she said, oh, look, I'll look after it. We'll just have a trysail up and a rest. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep. And then there's the point where you're changing from your storm jib and trysail up to your number 4. You know, that's not a good time either. And my feeling was that if I can just switch off for a couple of hours, I'll be ready for whatever Bass Strait wants to chuck at us. And so we went in there and
into Eden
and picked up a mooring. So we surfed into Eden in 30 knots of wind and picked up a mooring and had a good meal and a good sleep, and we were off again in about 6 hours. So like you can pause your racing, but it's just added on to your elapsed time, as you know. Yeah. So what it meant for us, which was huge, was that we were no longer competitive, because we'd been racing against 2 other little boats, Maluka and Gunrunner, and we'd beaten Gunrunner in earlier races. So just to miss out on that was really disheartening, and we were pretty down in the dumps, and particularly Bridget. It was pretty frosty on board for a day because she was disappointed.
The competitive juices were still flowing.
Well, yeah, and it's not that mine weren't, but I don't know. Maybe I was scared. Who knows? But look, I have to say that sort of since then, and the way it all played out, if it hadn't have been for that delay, we wouldn't have finished at midnight. We ended up being part of a really good story, and if it had gone the other way and was a story of injury and rescue, the whole negative impact of that, old women can't do it and all of this sort of stuff. But so anyway, after Eden we set off again and had fantastic sailing, and there's big seas left over from the northerly. That all softened and we flopped around in no wind. Then it picked up again. We thought, there's a chance we could get there before midnight, Wouldn't it be nice to finish this year? And so we, just, like, we never actually stopped racing the boat at all, but we just really threw everything at it. And
worked out pretty well in the end.
We did, yeah.
So you weren't going to do this year's race, were you? And then things changed for you?
Yeah, well, it was always an open question, because sort of having done the race with a stop, there's a little bit of unfinished business there. But, I think you don't really want to put those kind of pressures on yourself either. It's a bit silly. But the rig on the boat, I was not sure about, because I was told when I bought the boat it had been replaced in 2016. It turned out not all of it had. So I thought, well, I'm not going to sail it to Hobart unless I get a new rig. And I didn't really have any money for that. But just through the people that we'd met and from the story that came out of last year's one, a friend put us in touch with some people who said, yeah, we'll give you this amount of money. And so the boat's now got a new rig, which means it's game on again. So even now, if we go with our 20-year-old mainsail and, cruising baggy head sails, we can go to Hobart. So.
And Bridget will go with you as the crew? You're going two-handed again?
Yeah, we are, yeah. And, like I mentioned that disagreement that we had on board, but after we got to Hobart, then we went on a month's cruise around the bottom of Tassie and round to Port Davey and sailed the boat back up again. So we were together on the boat for 8 weeks, and now we want to do it again. So, something's working.
Well, you said earlier your husband encouraged you to buy another boat. I mean, reverse the roles. Husbands have said to wives, I'm going to buy another boat, and that hasn't led to a good outcome in many occasions. Yeah. So he must have been, or is marvellously supportive of you.
He is, actually, of hugely supportive. Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it? I'm really glad you've given me a chance to talk about that, because totally supportive. Yeah. And sort of ever since we've met, we've been, we met as two quite independent people, and we got together, and we're both still pretty independent, except we're married to each other, and we share a lot.
No doubt he'd be very proud of what you've done.
Yeah,
fantastic.
He can't quite. He's scratching his head as much as I am, really.
Just to say why.
Yeah. No, he is. He's incredibly supportive.
Well, Kathy, it's a marvellous story. I think you're to be congratulated on many fronts. I think the work you've done with the disability group, I think, is absolutely outstanding. I mean, it can't be said enough how dedicated you have been, and how I'm sure they would understand how great you've been for them. And I think everyone here at the Yacht Club, the CYC, and around the world have admired you and the effort you've put in, and you and Bridget on the two-hander. So I wish you well in this year's Rolex Sydney Hobart race. A safe trip, I think that's the main thing. And let's hope you get in before New Year's Eve, and I'm sure there'll be a big welcome party there for you again. I don't know whether I can guarantee all the fireworks, but very good luck and good sailing, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's been a pleasure.